Hi everyone. I wanted to take a minute to explain the genetics behind Huntington's disease. Some of you struggled with this on your homework assignment, so I thought I should hit it a little bit harder. And it's really not that hard to understand, but I do find, for whatever reason, all students, biology students, medical students, nurses, people seem to struggle a little bit with some concepts of the Punnett squares. We can kind of figure out how to do them, but it's the application of the terms such as homozygous, heterozygous, and dominant, recessive, and that sort of thing that get sticky sometimes. But it's really pretty simple if you sort it out a little bit and practice. So I want to go through it and talk a little bit about it, and this is just to help you clear up the homework assignment a little bit. So as you know, you get one trait gene from each parent. So you get one from your biological mother and one from your biological father. Those combine when the egg and sperm meet and fertilization occurs and you have conception and the baby starts to develop. You get those combined traits, and we call the genes that kind of are the code for you, your genotype. How you are expressed, what proteins you make, and what your eye color is and your hair color, and whether you got the same nose as your mother, that's all what we would term as phenotype. So there's what you're made up of, what you got from your parents, and then how it's expressed. And it's not a blend. You don't get a blend of, you might be a blended phenotype, but the genotypes don't meld and form a combined trait for something like eye color. For example, if your father has dark hair and your mom has light hair, you're not going to necessarily have medium hair. You're going to have probably dark or brown or light. And that just depends on the genes that you were given by each parent and whether they're dominant or recessive. And so all of this information came from a guy named Mendel, and he sort of came up with this pattern of inheritance because people didn't know. They were kind of confused. And so anyway, there's in Mendelian genetics, there's one dominant. There's a term that we use called dominant and a term that we use called recessive. In the case of a dominant gene, you only need one of them to get the trait. For example, brown hair, you just need one trait. You can get it from your mom or your dad. And if you get it from both, you're going to have brown hair. But if you get a blue hair or a blonde hair gene from your mom and a brown from your dad, you're going to have brown because it takes one when it's dominant. Okay? The blonde one is just sitting around in the gene pool waiting for maybe you to pass it on later. I mean, that's how it kind of gets hidden. You become a carrier for blonde if you're heterozygous. So it's the same thing with Huntington's. In this case, it's a little flip from your assignment, but the mother has a big H and a little h. When they're different, when you have a mix of a dominant and a recessive from your parent, we call that heterozygous. It's when you have one big H and one little h, or one dominant gene, one recessive gene. If you have the same, in this case the father has two little h's, those are recessive. And in this case, that means normal. That's the thing I think that gets sticky sometimes when we do these problems. Remember, Huntington's disease is a dominant inheritance gene, meaning you only need one dominant gene to get them. And so in this case, the mom will have Huntington's disease because she has that one. If she was going to mate with this person, he's always going to give off the normal gene. But you need two of them to be normal in this case. So if the egg that she makes has the big H in it, meets one of his little h sperm, it's going to be an offspring that has Huntington's. If she happens to throw that recessive gene, and that's all he has to give, then you're going to have a situation where you have the recessive trait, which is normal. And so the questions that we're asking in your homework was what percent, if it said the father, but in this case it's the mother. If the father was heterozygous for Huntington's disease, what's the chance that he would have Huntington's disease? That's 100%. He's got the dominant gene, 100%. His actual genes are different. You got 50% H and 50% little h, but that doesn't matter because it only takes one. So there's a 100% chance that he will have it. The other question was, what would be the chance of him giving the Huntington disease to his offspring? It'd be 50-50, because half the time he would give this one and half the time he would give this one. And so those are some terms to help you understand. And again, heterozygous means you get one of each. This is a homozygous condition where you have two of the same alleles or genes, and those are both recessive. That's called think same, homozygous. In the case of eye color, if these were big B's and little B's, a big B and a little b, you would have brown eyes. This would be the blue-eyed situation. So it's just the mode of inheritance is very important here, so that's an important term. I had a question here. So I gave you an example. Heterozygous for brown would be big B, little b. Whoops, this should be little b, little b. Hang on, let me correct that. Little b, homozygous recessive would give you blue. What would be, what trait would be expressed if the parent was homozygous dominant? That would mean, in this case, you would have big B, big B. What would the color be? It would be brown. There's nothing else there. All right, so again, back to Huntington's. Most dominant diseases have actually been eliminated from the gene pool because they're usually lethal, especially if each parent throws one. It usually the baby doesn't make it, but in certain cases, these dominant diseases continue and maintain in the gene pool. And the reason this one does is because of when Huntington disease manifests itself. People don't usually know they have it until they're in their 50s or whatever, 30s, or later in life. And so by then they don't know about it and they've already had children. So their children are sitting there waiting they don't know if they got the little h or the big H from mommy or daddy, whichever the case may be who's infected. So they can get tested and find out, but there's a 50-50 chance that they're going to have the disease later when they get to that age. And so in this case, the dominant, since it's expressed later, since a disease manifests its later, or the phenotype shows up later, it can kind of hide and stay in the gene pool. That's very unique. Usually when we think of hidden diseases, we think of recessive diseases, and that's mostly the case because you can be a carrier, just like in this case for brown eyes. I might have brown eyes and have that genotype, but I could have a blue-eyed child. So anyway, these are just some basic concepts of genetics, and Huntington's disease is an interesting one to look at because of the dominant mode of inheritance. And I hope this helped clear it up. I will post my little cheat sheet on Blackboard as well. Okay, thanks.